He was a billionaire, and she was carrying his child. Before boarding his flight to Europe, he dropped $20 into her hand and walked away. But when he came back, he wished he never had. They said money reveals who you truly are. For Ethan Blackwood, wealth had always meant power, control, and distance. His wife, Lena, was 8 months pregnant when he left. No goodbye kiss. No concern. Just $20 on the table and a promise he never intended to keep. Ethan believed nothing could change while he was gone. He was wrong, because the life Lena built in his absence was the one thing his billions couldn't buy. Before we go deeper into this story, welcome to Prime Tale, where the emotional, slow-burn stories like this stories about life, romance story, love, and difficult choices. Then you are in the right place. Please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Subscribing helps the channel grow and allows me to bring you more powerful stories like this every week. Thank you for being here. Now let us begin. Ethan Blackwood believed money was the answer to everything. At 38, he had built an empire that stretched across continents, luxury hotels, private equity firms, and silent investments that made other billionaires nervous. His name opened doors. His bank balance ended arguments. And yet, standing in the doorway of his penthouse apartment that morning, he felt nothing but irritation. Lena stood by the window, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other gripping the curtain as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. 8 months pregnant. Tired. Quiet. Too quiet. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, glancing at his watch for the third time in under a minute. His private jet was already waiting. "You don't have to go," Lena said softly, without turning around. He scoffed. "This trip is important. Europe doesn't run itself." She finally faced him. Her eyes weren't angry. That was what unsettled him. They were tired and resigned. "I just need money for food while you're gone," she said. "The fridge is almost empty." Ethan reached into his pocket without thinking. He pulled out a crisp $20 bill and dropped it on the marble table between them. "That should hold you for a bit." The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Lena stared at the bill as if it were a mistake. "Ethan, this won't even last a day." "You exaggerate everything," he replied, already reaching for his jacket. "Besides, I'll be gone 2 weeks." "You'll survive." The word echoed in her mind, but she said nothing. He didn't kiss her goodbye, didn't touch her belly, didn't ask about the baby's recent kicks or the sleepless nights. He simply walked out. The door clicked shut, and with it, something in Lena finally broke. The first night alone was the hardest. The electricity went out just after midnight. The generator Ethan usually maintained hadn't been serviced in months. Lena sat on the couch in the dark, sweat rolling down her back, her phone battery at 5%. She checked her account. Empty. All the shared cards? Blocked. It wasn't an accident. Ethan liked control. This was his way of reminding her who depended on who. The next morning, hunger forced her outside. She wrapped herself in a loose dress and walked slowly down the street, each step heavy, each breath labored. The upscale neighborhood felt colder than usual, neighbors passing without eye contact, security guards pretending not to notice her swollen feet. At a small roadside store, she placed bread, eggs, and bottled water on the counter. The total came to more than $20. She removed items one by one until the cashier nodded. That night, as she ate dry bread and drank water in the dim light of her phone screen, Lena made a decision. She would never beg Ethan again. Days passed. Her body ached. The baby kicked constantly, as if sensing the tension. Sleep came in fragments. Hunger became familiar. On the 5th day, she collapsed while trying to wash clothes by hand. A neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Carter, found her on the floor and rushed her to a small community clinic. "You're malnourished," the doctor said gently, "and stressed. That's dangerous for the baby." Lena nodded weakly. "I know." Mrs. Carter stayed with her, listening, as the truth spilled out. The billionaire husband, the $20, the abandonment. Some stories don't sound real until they're told out loud. The clinic helped her the only way they could. Free meals, basic care, a shared bed. For the first time in weeks, Lena slept without fear. In Europe, Ethan laughed over wine and contracts. He closed deals worth millions, toasted success, ignored missed calls from unknown numbers. When a colleague joked about family, Ethan smiled politely and changed the subject. At night, though, something strange happened. He dreamed of silence, of an empty house, of a child crying somewhere he couldn't reach. He woke each time annoyed at himself. "It's just stress," he muttered. But the unease didn't leave. 2 weeks later, Ethan returned home early. Not because he missed Lena, but because something felt off. As his car pulled into the driveway, the house looked darker than he remembered. Quiet. Too quiet. No lights. No movement. He stepped inside and froze. The marble table was empty. The $20 bill was gone. And so was his wife. Ethan stood in the middle of the living room, his suitcase still in his hand, staring at the emptiness as if the house itself had betrayed him. "Lena," he called out. His voice echoed back at him, hollow and unanswered. He walked through the penthouse slowly, irritation giving way to confusion. The bedroom was untouched too untouched. Lena's clothes were gone. The dresser drawers were empty. Her shoes, once lying neatly by the door, had disappeared. Only the baby's ultrasound photo remained, still taped to the mirror where she had placed it months ago. Ethan frowned. This wasn't like her. Lena was quiet, patient, predictable. She didn't storm out. She didn't make scenes. If she had left, it meant something had gone terribly wrong. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number. Straight to voicemail. Again. And again. His chest tightened slightly, an unfamiliar sensation he dismissed immediately. "She's being dramatic," he muttered. "She'll come back." But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. He called his assistant. "Cancel my meetings for today," Ethan said sharply. "And find my wife." There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, Mrs. Blackwood hasn't been seen here for weeks." "What do you mean, weeks?" "The staff said she stopped ordering groceries. No driver pickups. No medical visits scheduled through the house accounts." Ethan's grip tightened around the phone. "Why wasn't I informed?" "We assumed you." "We're aware." He ended the call without responding. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something dangerously close to panic. Across town, Lena lay in a small hospital bed, staring at a cracked ceiling. The room smelled of disinfectant and cheap soap. The sheets were thin but clean. Her belly was even larger now, her body heavy with exhaustion. Mrs. Carter sat beside her, peeling an orange slowly. "You're safe here," the old woman said gently. "Don't worry about him." Lena closed her eyes. "I'm not worried anymore," she whispered. "I'm done." The doctor had warned her that stress could send her into early labor. She needed rest. Stability. She had neither until now. The clinic staff helped her apply for emergency assistance. A social worker listened without judgment. They didn't care who her husband was. They only cared that she and her baby survived. And for the first time since Ethan left, Lena felt seen. Back at the penthouse, Ethan paced. He searched security footage. No dramatic exit. No suitcase rolling down the hallway. Just Lena, moving slowly, carrying a small bag, leaving through the service elevator. Alone. Pregnant. With nowhere obvious to go. His jaw clenched. She had $20, he said aloud, as if saying it enough times would make it make sense. $20. The number suddenly sounded ridiculous. Insulting. He remembered the way she had looked at the bill. Not angry. Not crying. Just empty. Something twisted in his stomach. Ethan drove to every place he could think of. Upscale clinics. Private hospitals. Hotels. No one had seen her. By evening, his frustration had turned into dread. That night, he poured himself a drink he didn't touch. His phone buzzed an unknown number. He answered immediately. "Mr. Blackwood," a woman's voice asked. "Yes. This is Riverside Community Clinic. Your wife was admitted here days ago." The glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. "Is she?" His voice caught. "Is the baby?" "They're stable." But she was malnourished and severely stressed when she arrived. Malnourished. The word hit harder than any accusation. "I'll be there," Ethan said. Right now. When he arrived, the clinic looked nothing like the hospitals he funded. The walls were worn, the chairs mismatched, the air heavy with quiet resilience. A nurse stopped him at the desk. "She doesn't want to see you." Ethan stiffened. "I'm her husband." "She made that very clear," the nurse replied calmly. "And she asked us to respect her wishes." For the first time in his life, Ethan Blackwood was denied access. He stood there powerless, as patients passed him by people with nothing, yet somehow more dignity than he felt in that moment. Through a partially open door down the hallway, he saw her. Lena. Thinner. Paler. Lying in a narrow bed, one hand protectively curved over her belly. She was talking softly to Mrs. Carter, smiling faintly. Smiling. Not because of him. Not for him. Something inside Ethan cracked. He gasped not from shock alone, but from the realization that the world had moved on without him, and his money hadn't followed. He sat in his car outside the clinic long after the lights inside dimmed, watching the entrance as if Lena might suddenly walk out and wave him over. She didn't. The realization settled slowly, painfully. She didn't need him anymore. For the first time in his life, money couldn't open the door he wanted through. Inside the clinic, Lena woke to the sound of rain tapping against the window. Her body felt heavy, but her mind was clear. The baby kicked gently, a quiet reminder that she wasn't alone. Mrs. Carter had fallen asleep in the chair beside her bed. Lena smiled faintly. This small, imperfect place had given her something Ethan never had: peace. A social worker named Maya visited later that morning, holding a clipboard and wearing a warm, practiced smile. "We've arranged temporary housing for you," Maya said. "It's modest but safe. You'll have medical support and food assistance." Lena nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. No one had ever said "we" to her before. Ethan, meanwhile, was unraveling. He returned to the penthouse and found it unbearable. The silence mocked him. Every corner reminded him of how little he had noticed when Lena was still there. He opened his laptop and checked his accounts. Everything was intact, billions untouched. Yet for the first time, the numbers meant nothing. He thought about the $20 again. How casually he had handed it over. How confidently he had walked away. The memory made his chest ache. Determined to fix things the only way he knew how, Ethan went to work. He called lawyers, doctors, private hospitals. He offered donations, renovations, entire wings funded in Lena's name. The clinic refused. "She asked us not to accept anything tied to you," the director said firmly. Ethan was stunned. No one refused him. Ever. Days passed. Lena moved into a small apartment arranged by the clinic. It had peeling paint, thin curtains, and a view of a parking lot, but was hers. She decorated slowly. A borrowed crib. Second-hand baby clothes folded with care. Mrs. Carter visited often, bringing soup and stories from her youth. Lena laughed more than she had in years. At night, she talked to her baby. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. No matter what. And for the first time, she believed it. Ethan watched from a distance. He hired a private investigator not to control, but to know. The reports were simple. Lena attended prenatal appointments. She ate regularly. She smiled. She never once asked about him. That hurt more than anger ever could. One afternoon, Ethan received call that changed everything. "She's in labor," the investigator said. Ethan's heart stopped. "I'm on my way," he said, already grabbing his keys. At the hospital, chaos surrounded him. Nurses moved quickly. Voices overlapped. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. He tried to follow but was stopped. "Family only," a nurse said. "I am family." The nurse checked the chart, then looked up. Not according to her. Those words crushed him. Hours later, a cry echoed through the hallway. A baby's cry. Ethan felt his knees weaken. A nurse emerged, smiling. "It's a girl. Healthy." Relief washed over him, followed immediately by something heavier. Regret. "Can I see them?" he asked quietly. The nurse hesitated. She agreed for 1 minute. Inside the room, Lena lay exhausted but glowing, her daughter cradled against her chest. Ethan froze in the doorway. The baby was perfect. Lena looked up and met his eyes. There was no anger in her gaze, only distance. "This is your daughter," she said calmly. "Her name is Hope." Hope. The word landed like a verdict. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. On the third day, Lena was discharged. She carried Hope out herself, wrapped in a soft blanket. Mrs. Carter walked beside her, steady and protective. Ethan watched from across the parking lot, his expensive suit feeling like a costume he no longer deserved. He wanted to run to them. He didn't. For once, he chose not to force his way in. Back in his office, Ethan tried to bury himself in work. It didn't help. Contracts blurred together. Meetings went unheard. Every pause was filled with the memory of Lena's tired eyes and Hope's tiny fingers curling instinctively around nothing. He started noticing things he'd ignored before. How assistants flinched when he raised his voice. How employees avoided his gaze. How silence followed him everywhere. Power, he realized, had isolated him. Weeks passed. Lena settled into motherhood with quiet determination. She learned Hope's cries, her tiny rhythms, the way she calmed when sung to softly at night. Money was tight, but dignity wasn't. The clinic connected her with a small support group for new mothers. They didn't know who her husband was, and she never told them. She was just Lena, and she liked it that way. One evening, there was a knock at her door. Mrs. Carter answered it. Ethan stood outside, holding nothing in his hands. "I'm not here to argue," he said quietly. "I just want to talk." Mrs. Carter studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. Lena appeared in the hallway, Hope asleep against her chest. Ethan's breath caught. "I was wrong," he said immediately. "About everything." Lena didn't respond. "I thought money could replace care," he continued. "I thought control was the same as strength." Still silence. "I left you with $20, he whispered. "And I will regret that for the rest of my life." At last, Lena spoke. "You didn't just leave me with $20, she said calmly. "You left me alone." Her words were soft but devastating. Ethan swallowed hard. "Tell me what to do." Lena looked down at Hope, then back at him. "You don't get to fix this with money," she said. "Or promises." He nodded slowly. "I know. If you want to be in her life," Lena continued, "you start from the bottom. Like everyone else." "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means humility," she replied. "It means showing up without expecting forgiveness." Ethan nodded again. For the first time, he didn't argue. He left that night without holding his daughter. But something had shifted. The next morning, Ethan made a decision that shocked his entire company. He stepped down as CEO. Not temporarily. Completely. He announced a restructuring that placed people above profits, funded employee wellness programs, and redirected personal wealth into community clinics without his name attached. The board was furious. Ethan didn't care. Weeks later, he returned to Lena's door. This time, he brought groceries. Simple ones. Milk. Bread. Diapers. No speeches. No expectations. Lena let him in. Hope slept peacefully between them, unaware that her father was learning slowly, painfully, what it meant to be human. Last, Lena spoke. "You didn't just leave me with $20, she said calmly. "You left me alone." Her words were soft but devastating. Ethan swallowed hard. "Tell me what to do." Lena looked down at Hope, then back at him. "You don't get to fix this with money," she said. "Or promises." He nodded slowly. "I know. If you want to be in her life," Lena continued, "you start from the bottom. Like everyone else." "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means humility," she replied. "It means showing up without expecting forgiveness." Ethan nodded again. For the first time, he didn't argue. He left that night without holding his daughter. But something had shifted. The next morning, Ethan made a decision that shocked his entire company. He stepped down as CEO. Not temporarily. Completely. He announced a restructuring that placed people above profits, funded employee wellness programs, and redirected personal wealth into community clinics without his name attached. The board was furious. Ethan didn't care. Weeks later, he returned to Lena's door. This time, he brought groceries. Simple ones. Milk. Bread. Diapers. No speeches. No expectations. Lena let him in. Hope slept peacefully between them, unaware that her father was learning slowly, painfully what it meant to be human. Ethan woke before dawn, a rare sight even for him. The city below his penthouse was still cloaked in darkness, the streetlights casting long, lonely shadows across empty roads. He hadn't slept well, not since that night at the clinic. Every time his eyes closed, he saw Hope's tiny fingers curling around nothing and Lena's calm, distant gaze. The image haunted him more than any business failure ever could. He poured himself a cup of black coffee, the bitter liquid burning his throat, and sat by the window. For the first time, the view of his sprawling empire didn't thrill him. It felt hollow. Every tower, every office, every signed contract seemed meaningless compared to what he had lost, or rather, what he had taken for granted. Ethan thought about Lena. Not the Lena he thought he knew. Not the fragile, dependent woman he'd assumed would wait for him, but the woman who had survived on nothing but courage, resourcefulness, and sheer determination. That realization twisted in his chest like a knife. He had left her with $20. 20. He had believed that wealth gave him control, that his absence could be mitigated by mere numbers in a bank account. But Lena had built a life, however modest, without him. She had endured hunger, pain, exhaustion, and fear, and she had come through it stronger, more self-reliant than he ever imagined. Ethan's phone buzzed. He ignored it. Calls from assistants, lawyers, business partners, all meaningless. The only number he wanted was hers, and she wouldn't answer. Not yet. Meanwhile, across town, Lena's days were settling into a rhythm. Hope slept in the small crib Lena had managed to assemble, while Lena herself moved carefully around the apartment, mindful of her swelling belly and the lingering exhaustion from childbirth. The apartment was far from luxurious peeling paint, old furniture, mismatched utensils, but it was hers, and she had decorated it with care. A small vase of flowers Mrs. Carter had brought added color to the worn kitchen table. Every day, Lena learned a little more about independence, about resilience, about the quiet power of doing for oneself. For the first time, she felt free from the shadows of Ethan's wealth and ego. When Hope kicked, Lena laughed softly. "You're strong, aren't you?" she whispered, tracing tiny fingers along the curve of her daughter's cheek. Ethan, on the other hand, struggled to translate his wealth into redemption. He had already attempted to donate to the clinic that had helped Lena, but his offers were politely declined. He tried sending gifts, arranging luxurious items for the newborn, even hiring top-tier caregivers, but Lena rejected every attempt. It was humiliating. For the first time, Ethan realized that money couldn't solve everything. That some things trust, respect, love couldn't be bought or bargained for. He began to study humility the hard way. He spent time volunteering in the community clinics he had funded, not as a name on a donation plaque, but as a worker. He prepared meals for the sick, cleaned floors, comforted patients. Each task was uncomfortable at first. Each task reminded him of how little he had ever done to earn gratitude or affection. But slowly, he felt a shift within him. It was awkward, yes. Painful, yes. But also enlightening. Days turned into weeks. Ethan learned to listen without interrupting, to help without expecting thanks, and to care without seeking recognition. Every evening, he thought about Lena and hoped what they were doing, how they were surviving, and how he could ever hope to be part of their lives again. He wrote in a journal for the first time in years, noting not strategies for expansion or profit, but reflections on his own failures, his pride, and the emptiness he felt despite all his wealth. He realized something profoundly unsettling. His empire, his billions, and his reputation meant nothing if he could not be a husband or a father in the ways that truly mattered. Across town, Lena began to notice small changes. The community clinic sent occasional updates to her, mentioning a quiet man volunteering tirelessly, always in the background, never seeking acknowledgement. It took her a moment to realize who it was. Ethan. A part of her stirred anger, resentment, a hint of disbelief. She had vowed never to rely on him, never to let him dictate her life or her child's. And yet, she couldn't deny the subtle shift. His actions spoke louder than any apology could. But trust, she reminded herself, wasn't rebuilt in days. It was earned step by step. And she had every intention of ensuring that he truly understood the cost of his pride before she let him back into her world. One rainy evening, Ethan arrived at Lena's apartment not to impose, not to plead, not to demand forgiveness, but simply to leave a note. I am learning to be better. Not just for me, not just for my reputation, but for you and Hope. I am trying to earn my place again. I do not expect your trust, only the chance to show you I am capable of change. He placed the note carefully on the doorstep and left without knocking. Inside, Lena read it. She folded it slowly, staring at it long after she had finished. There was a tension in her chest, a flicker of hope, perhaps, or the recognition that this man was beginning to understand the gravity of what he had done. But she made no reply. Not yet. That night, as Hope slept peacefully, Lena whispered to herself, actions matter more than words. Outside, Ethan walked alone in rain, soaked through, humbled, but strangely lighter than he'd felt in years. The journey ahead would be long, fraught with mistakes and lessons, but for the first time, he understood that real wealth wasn't measured in dollars, it was measured in love, humility, and sacrifice. And he was ready to start learning the hard way. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and glistening under the city lights. Ethan walked slowly, feeling the cold bite of evening air, but his mind was consumed entirely by one thought, Lena. And Hope. He had spent the past weeks trying to become someone who deserved to be in their lives, yet he still had no idea whether Lena would ever allow him the chance. Each small step, volunteering, leaving the note, rejecting his own pride, had been a trial in humility. And each night, as he lay in his luxury apartment alone, he confronted the emptiness that money could never fill. He remembered the day he had left Lena with $20. The casual cruelty of that moment haunted him now. He had believed she would manage. He had believed he could control her from afar. But she had thrived, survived, and endured all without him. And that, perhaps more than anything, was the source of his growing awe and guilt. Lena, meanwhile, had begun to carve out a life that felt entirely her own. Her apartment was modest, but comfortable. Hope slept in the crib that Lena had painstakingly assembled, swaddled in soft blankets Mrs. Carter had sewn herself. Lena's days were a delicate balance of rest, baby care, and rebuilding her own strength. She had started attending a small mother's support group, the kind of place where wealth and status didn't matter, and where no one asked about her husband. She thrived on the anonymity, the freedom to simply exist without scrutiny. Yet even as she adjusted, a part of her remained vigilant. Ethan's shadow, long and imposing, lingered in her mind. She did not trust him, not yet, and she would not allow herself to forget the pain he had caused. One afternoon, Lena received a visit from the social worker, Maya. "I have some news," Maya said, her tone cautious. "There's someone asking about you and your daughter." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "It's your husband," Maya admitted. "He's trying to reach you." Lena's fingers tightened around Hope. "And he left a note. He said he wants to show that he's changed." Lena stared at her daughter, who cooed softly in her arms. She considered ignoring it, pretending it hadn't happened. But curiosity pricked at her, sharp and uncomfortable. She had no illusions that he would change overnight, but perhaps, just perhaps, he was beginning to understand. She remained silent, making no decision yet. Ethan, on the other side of town, prepared himself for a second attempt. Not to demand forgiveness, not to intrude, but to witness. To see Lena and Hope, even from afar, and remind himself why he was trying. He parked a block away, keeping the car lights off, and watched her building carefully. Lena appeared in the doorway, holding Hope, walking gracefully despite exhaustion and fatigue. Ethan's chest tightened. She was radiant in her determination, a mother forged from trials he had never imagined she could endure without his protection. His mind raced. He had spent so long controlling everything: money, people, outcomes, but he could not control this. Not Lena, not Hope, not time. And yet, something stirred in him. A fierce determination to act differently. To not just apologize, but to earn the right to belong in their lives. That evening, Lena took Hope for a walk. The streets were quiet, and the night air was crisp. She noticed a man standing across the street, watching her intently, but not approaching. She stopped, heart racing. The man raised a hand slightly, not in greeting, but in a gesture of restraint. Ethan. Her first instinct was to retreat. But something about his posture, the humility, the hesitation, stirred a long-buried sense of hope. He had come all this way, and did not demand entry. That small restraint spoke louder than any words could. She continued walking, keeping Hope close. Ethan mirrored her at a distance, never closing the gap, simply following, observing, learning. For the first time, they existed in the same space, without confrontation. A fragile peace. A tentative understanding. Over the next few days, Ethan continued this careful distance. He delivered groceries anonymously, left small necessities at the door, never intruding, never demanding acknowledgement. Lena noticed the signs. First, it was the milk and eggs that mysteriously appeared each morning. Then the diapers, the wipes, the blankets. Each gift was practical, thoughtful, and silent. Her anger softened slightly, not completely, but enough to recognize that he was trying. That he was learning lessons she had known all along. Patience, humility, and the weight of responsibility. Ethan's own lessons were not easy. Each night, he reflected on his arrogance, on the $20 that had caused so much suffering. He realized that no amount of wealth could erase the pain, but consistent, meaningful action could create a new path forward. For Lena, this time was a test. She watched, waited, and evaluated. She would not be fooled by gestures alone. Words were meaningless without proof. Actions would determine the future. And so, they stood at a crossroads. Two paths lay before them, one toward reconciliation, fraught with trust-building and emotional labor, the other toward permanent separation, a life defined by lessons learned the hard way. Ethan understood the stakes. Failure now meant losing not only Lena, but the opportunity to witness Hope grow up under his guidance. Success required more than money. It required transformation, humility, and patience. Lena understood the stakes, too. She could allow him back into their lives, or she could continue building a life entirely independent of him. Each option carried risk, but also potential. The night ended quietly, the city humming softly around them. And though neither spoke, both were aware. The coming days would decide everything. The following morning, Lena woke to sunlight streaming through her thin curtains. Hope stirred beside her, stretching tiny arms and letting out a soft coo. Lena smiled faintly, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. Even in this modest apartment, the world felt warmer than it had in months. Yet beneath the calm, a tension remained. She had seen signs that Ethan was attempting to change anonymous deliveries, thoughtful gestures, small acts of consideration, but she refused to let hope or fear dictate her next steps. Trust, she reminded herself, was earned, not given. And Ethan's previous failures weighed heavily on her mind. $20. 2 weeks of abandonment. A life forced to survive without him. Those memories did not fade easily. Across town, Ethan had made a plan. He knew that actions alone would not suffice. He needed to demonstrate consistency, patience, and humility over time. No dramatic gestures. No declarations. He began volunteering daily at the community clinic that had cared for Lena, staying out of the limelight, assisting mothers, preparing meals, cleaning floors, and listening attentively to every story shared. At first, the work felt foreign, even humiliating. He was used to commanding people, delegating tasks, wielding influence effortlessly. Here, the rules were different. Respect had to be earned, not assumed. Praise was neither expected nor given. And failure to act correctly carried no monetary consequence, only moral weight. Lena noticed the subtle changes in her life. Deliveries continued groceries, essential baby supplies, and small personal items like blankets and soft clothing, all practical and thoughtful. Never extravagant, never showy. Each delivery came with no note, no apology, no demand for acknowledgement. Yet the message was clear. Someone was thinking of her, consistently and silently. She kept a careful distance, monitoring without engaging. Every morning, she cataloged what had arrived, tracking patterns. There was a precision to it, a predictability that suggested a deliberate effort. She suspected Ethan, but she refused to confirm it outright. Lena's independence remained her anchor, and she refused to let curiosity compromise her resolve. Days turned into weeks. Ethan continued his quiet campaign, learning humility not just from labor, but from observation. He began noticing details he had once ignored: the fatigue in a mother's eyes, the gentle patience required to soothe a crying child, the way exhaustion manifested not in complaints, but in quiet perseverance. Each lesson he absorbed added weight to his understanding of what he had taken for granted. Love, care, and trust were not commodities to be bought. They were earned through patience, consistency, and selflessness. Meanwhile, Lena faced her own internal struggle. On one hand, she valued independence and self-sufficiency. On the other, she could not ignore the pattern emerging outside her door. She wondered whether Ethan's efforts were genuine or simply a continuation of his ego, cloaked in humility. Could a man who abandoned her and their child truly transform? Or was this just another act, another attempt to assert control indirectly? Her instincts screamed caution. Yet a small part of her, buried beneath layers of hurt, curiosity, and residual love, could not ignore the possibility of change. One afternoon, as she prepared lunch, she found a small stack of baby clothes neatly folded outside her apartment door. A note accompanied them: "Pick these up at the market. Thought Hope might like them." No need to reply. Lena's breath caught. She studied the handwriting, familiar yet subdued, restrained. It was unmistakably his. And yet it was different from the arrogant scrawl she remembered, a quiet, careful script that reflected thoughtfulness and effort. She tucked the note away without immediate response, debating internally what it represented. Was it the beginning of redemption or merely a test of her patience? That evening, Lena took Hope for a walk to the nearby park. The air was crisp, and the city hummed with life. She noticed a man in the distance, sitting quietly on a bench, observing but not approaching. Ethan. He had maintained his distance for weeks, respecting her boundaries. He did not speak. He did not intrude. He simply existed nearby, a silent presence, a testament to his restraint. Lena felt conflicting emotions: lingering anger, cautious curiosity, and a strange, tentative hope. She did not trust him yet. She would not. But she could no longer ignore the efforts he was making. Over the next several days, Lena introduced small, controlled opportunities to test him. A casual acknowledgement of a delivery, a subtle question about a grocery item, a conversation with Mrs. Carter within earshot of Ethan, each action deliberate, gauging his response. Ethan passed each test with care. He answered honestly, without defensiveness, without arrogance. He admitted mistakes, offered assistance without expecting gratitude, and most importantly, demonstrated patience, never pressuring Lena or Hope. He admitted mistakes, offered assistance without expecting gratitude, and most importantly, demonstrated patience, never pressuring Lena or Hope. Each day Lena's resolve softened slightly, tempered by caution and careful observation. She realized that while she could not yet trust him fully, she could observe change and allow the possibility of reconciliation to grow organically. One night, Lena tucked Hope into bed and looked out the window. Across the street, Ethan remained on his usual bench, quietly observing the building without intruding. The rain had returned, soft and steady. The city glistened under wet streetlights. Lena whispered to herself, "Actions matter more than words, and he's proving that." Ethan, alone in the shadows, whispered silently as well, "I will earn her trust, no matter how long it takes." The stakes had shifted. What had begun as pride and anger was now a complex dance of redemption and vigilance. Neither had spoken openly, yet the tension between them pulsed like electricity, unseen, unbroken, but undeniable. For both Lena and Ethan, the coming weeks would test patience, humility, and the very nature of love itself. The days had grown longer. Yet Lena found herself savoring the quiet moments, the sound of Hope's gentle breathing in the morning, the way sunlight fell across the worn floorboards of her apartment, the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. It was a life stripped of luxury but filled with purpose, autonomy, and the fragile beauty of new beginnings. Still, the shadow of Ethan lingered, ever present in the distance. He had not crossed her threshold in weeks, choosing instead to prove his sincerity through patience and careful observation. Each anonymous delivery, every small act of assistance, and his silent presence across the street had begun to alter the dynamic between them, though Lena refused to admit it aloud. Ethan spent hours at the community clinic, a different man from the one who had once walked away with $20. He scrubbed floors, prepared meals, and assisted mothers who were barely managing to care for their children. He was meticulous, careful, and entirely focused on others, suppressing the lingering arrogance that had defined his life for decades. The work was grueling, physically and emotionally. He observed exhaustion, desperation, and despair, and each encounter served as a mirror reflecting his past failures. Yet in every mother he helped, in every child he soothed, he learned humility, patience, and the essence of selfless care. He also learned restraint. He continued to leave deliveries at Lena's doorstep: groceries, diapers, blankets, and clothes. Each item was chosen with care, demonstrating thoughtfulness without fanfare. No notes, no apology letters, no demands. He allowed his actions to speak for him. Lena noticed the pattern immediately. She would find items waiting, neatly arranged, practical, and consistent. Sometimes a fresh loaf of bread, sometimes a soft blanket, sometimes a small toy for hope. Each delivery was deliberate but restrained, reflecting thought, not extravagance. She cataloged each one mentally, observing the timing, the thoughtfulness, the lack of expectation. She began to see the effort behind the acts, a calculated, sustained attempt at earning her trust. Yet she remained guarded. Words could be empty. Gestures could be performative. Only consistency could earn her confidence, and she intended to ensure it. One afternoon, Lena took Hope for a walk through the small park near her apartment. The trees swayed gently in the wind, and the distant hum of traffic was punctuated by the laughter of children. Across the path, a man sat on a bench, quietly observing without approaching. Ethan. He had maintained his distance consistently, never intruding, never demanding acknowledgement. Lena's pulse quickened. Part of her wanted to turn and confront him, demand explanations, or express her anger. But another part, the part she rarely acknowledged, recognized the restraint, the effort, and the humility in his actions. She decided to continue walking, hope in her arms, maintaining a careful balance between curiosity and caution. Ethan mirrored her steps from a distance, maintaining his silence, his respect, and his patient vigilance. Over the next week, Lena began small experiments. She left a note thanking whoever had delivered groceries without specifying Ethan, leaving it where it could be seen by him. She asked Mrs. Carter about supplies without looking for recognition. She tested his reactions subtly, observing whether he sought attention, tried to control the situation, or acted with humility. Ethan passed each test. He never intruded, never demanded gratitude, never revealed himself. Each time, he acted quietly, thoughtfully, and without ego. Each success was a small but significant step toward rebuilding the bridge between them. Meanwhile, Ethan wrestled with internal challenges. His pride had been a lifelong companion, and shedding it was not simple. Each act of service, each patient response, each silent gesture required self-discipline and reflection. He wrote in a journal nightly, documenting his failures, his lessons, and his intentions. The words became a mirror, revealing both his arrogance and his genuine desire to change. Through this process, Ethan discovered a profound truth. Wealth could provide comfort and convenience, but it could not buy redemption, respect, or love. These had to be earned, and only through consistent, selfless action could he hope to regain what he had lost. One evening, Lena discovered a carefully wrapped blanket at her doorstep, soft and warm, with a note tucked inside. For Hope, may she always be warm and safe. She studied the handwriting, familiar yet subdued, restrained. It was unmistakably his, yet unlike the arrogant scrawl, she remembered calm, careful, and thoughtful. She held the note, turning it over in her hands, feeling the weight of intention behind it. She did not respond immediately. She had learned to observe, to measure, to protect both herself and Hope. But inside, a spark of cautious hope flickered, a recognition that change, however slow and imperfect, was possible. Ethan, standing across the street, observed the building quietly. He knew Lena had seen the note. He understood the delicate balance he had to maintain. Not too close, not too far, silent but persistent. Every action mattered, and he could not afford arrogance, impatience, or entitlement. For the first time in his life, he He realized that earning trust required more than words, money, or promises. It required vigilance, humility, and the willingness to accept rejection without complaint. The days that followed became a silent dialogue. Lena and Ethan communicated not through speech, but through actions, restraint, and observation. Each delivery, each patient act, each measured step was a word in a growing conversation. And slowly, the tension between them shifted. Lena's anger softened, replaced by cautious respect. Ethan's pride gave way to humility. A bridge was forming, tentative, fragile, but real. The next chapter of their lives was no longer defined by the past, but by the choices they made in the present. And both knew that the coming weeks would test patience, commitment, and the depth of their character. The following morning, Lena awoke to the gentle sunlight filtering through her apartment window. Hope stirred in the crib beside her, her tiny arms reaching toward the warmth of the day. Lena smiled faintly, brushing back her hair and taking a deep breath. Life had begun to feel steady, if still fragile. Yet today felt different. A small, persistent unease settled in her chest, a sense that the fragile balance she had maintained might finally shift. And it did. Across the street, Ethan stood quietly at a safe distance, holding nothing in his hands. No deliveries, no note, only his presence, patient and restrained. For the first time, he was ready for direct interaction, though he understood fully the weight of what that meant. Lena took Hope in her arms and stepped onto the balcony for fresh air. The city below was alive with morning activity, and for a moment, the world felt normal again. Then she saw him, Ethan, standing across the narrow street, observing quietly. Her heart pounded, a mix of anger, curiosity, and cautious hope. She had seen the changes, the silent efforts, and the restraint. She knew he had been learning. But seeing him there, unannounced yet careful, forced the question she had avoided. Was enough? Could she allow herself to confront him without losing control? She took a steadying breath. "Ethan," she called softly, though the sound barely carried across the street. He flinched slightly at the sound of his name, a rare crack in his composed exterior. "Lena," he replied, voice calm but layered with uncertainty. I know you don't want me here. He paused, struggling to find words that would not feel presumptuous. "I wanted to see you. To speak. If you'll allow it." Lena studied him. The arrogance she had once despised was absent. His posture was careful, restrained. There was a humility in his eyes she had not seen before, an understanding of the pain he had caused. "You left me with $20, she said bluntly, her voice steady, though her chest tightened with old memories. "Do you understand what that meant?" Ethan's face tightened, a mixture of shame and realization. "I do," he admitted. "Every day since, I've regretted it. I thought I could control things with money, with absence. I was wrong. Completely wrong." Lena's eyes narrowed, studying his face. She did not soften, she did not smile. Trust was not given lightly. "Actions speak louder than words, Ethan." "Have they?" He nodded, swallowing hard. "I've tried. I've spent weeks learning what it means to care without entitlement, to act without expecting thanks. I've done everything I can think of to show you, through deeds, that I am trying to be worthy of your trust again. I understand if it's not enough. I only ask the chance to prove it." Lena's heart clenched. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. She could feel it in the way he held himself, the restraint he had maintained, the patience he had shown over weeks of careful, consistent effort. Yet the pain of the past, the memory of his abandonment, still burned sharply. "You've done better," she said cautiously. "But you're asking for something that can't be rushed. Trust isn't given for weeks of effort, it's earned over months, maybe years. Do you understand that?" Ethan's gaze met hers, unwavering. "I do," he said softly, "and I'm willing to spend whatever time it takes. I don't expect forgiveness, only the chance to show you that I've changed. That I can be the father Hope deserves and the husband you deserve." For a long moment, Lena said nothing. She held Hope closer, feeling the baby stir gently against her chest. She remembered nights alone, the exhaustion, the fear, the hunger she had endured. And yet, she also remembered her strength, the life she had built without him, the lessons learned through survival. "I'm not saying yes," she finally said, her voice firm. "And I'm not saying no. I'm saying actions matter. You have to prove yourself consistently every day. No shortcuts. No excuses." Ethan's lips pressed together, relief and determination mingling in his eyes. "I understand," he said quietly. "And I will. Every day as long as it takes." The conversation ended there, brief, cautious, yet profoundly significant. It was the first real step toward reconciliation, a bridge being built slowly and deliberately between past pain and the possibility of a future together. Lena retreated inside, holding Hope close. She felt a flicker of hope, tempered by caution. She would watch, observe, and test him further. But for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a small, tentative thought. Maybe, just maybe, he could change. Ethan walked away, heart pounding with the weight of the promise he had just made. No money, no influence, no entitlement, only consistent, humble effort would carry him forward now. The lesson was painful, the path long, but he was ready. Over the following days, Lena continued to test him in subtle ways, allowing small interactions, observing his responses, noting the sincerity in his actions. Each delivery, each silent act, each carefully restrained presence spoke volumes. And slowly, the first fragile threads of trust began to weave themselves between them. Ethan learned patience in ways he had never imagined. He learned to wait without pressing, to act without expectation, to demonstrate sincerity without seeking reward. Every small success, every step of restraint and humility, built toward the day when Lena might truly allow him back into their lives. By the end of the chapter, both Lena and Ethan understood the truth. The road to reconciliation was not a straight path. It was fraught with tests, patience, and self-reflection. Yet, for the first time, hope existed, careful, delicate, but real. And with Hope, their daughter, at the center of it all, neither could deny that the stakes had never been higher or the opportunity for change greater. The city streets glistened from an overnight drizzle, reflecting the first hints of sunlight in 1,000 fractured reflections. Lena walked carefully, with Hope nestled in her arms, feeling the rhythm of her tiny heartbeat through the baby's chest. The day was ordinary, yet charged with unspoken tension, the tension of lives intertwined by past mistakes and the possibility of change. Lena had maintained her cautious distance from Ethan, observing him indirectly. His deliveries continued, precise and thoughtful, yet still humble: diapers, fresh produce, blankets, and occasionally a small toy for Hope. No notes, no declarations of love, no attempts to intrude. Each act was deliberate, demonstrating patience, humility, and understanding. And yet Lena remained wary. Weeks had passed, but her trust had been fractured too deeply to be rebuilt quickly. Actions alone were not enough. She needed to see consistency sustained over time, unbroken by ego, frustration, or expectation. Ethan, on the other side of town, began his day at the community clinic before sunrise. Today he was assigned to help a young mother who had just given birth and was struggling with exhaustion, lack of resources, and fear. He followed every instruction meticulously, offering guidance without interference, assistance without arrogance, and empathy without expectation. The work was draining physically and emotionally, but Ethan felt alive in a way he never had before. Alive, not because of power or wealth, but because he was learning to act from the heart. Each small act was a step toward atonement, a way to honor the daughter he had abandoned and the wife he had left with nothing. That afternoon, Lena decided to test him more directly. She placed a basket of essentials at the bottom of the apartment stairwell, making no effort to identify herself or specify who would be receiving it. Then she watched discreetly from her balcony across the street. Ethan arrived shortly after, scanning the area before quietly lifting the basket without fanfare. He delivered it to the doorstep, adjusting its placement so it would not obstruct anyone's path. When he noticed Lena watching from above, he did not approach or wave. He simply nodded subtly before walking away, leaving her to observe. It was a small act, almost imperceptible, yet it spoke volumes. Humility was not about recognition, it was about consistency, restraint, and thoughtfulness. Lena's chest tightened. She allowed herself a flicker of hope, tempered by caution. Days passed with this rhythm, small acts of service, measured presence, and subtle testing. Lena observed him quietly, noting his restraint. He did not try to manipulate her feelings. He did not rush forgiveness. He simply demonstrated his commitment to change through consistent effort, proving that he could act without entitlement or expectation. Lena began to see the transformation not just in what he did, but in how he carried himself. The arrogance, the impatience, the obsession with control had all but vanished, replaced by patience, thoughtfulness, and a quiet resolve. One evening, Lena faced a new dilemma. A sudden illness struck, hope a high fever that left her weak and crying. Lena panicked, realizing she needed help beyond her capacity. She hesitated for a moment, her pride wrestling with necessity, then called Ethan. He arrived within minutes, his movements calm and deliberate, assessing the situation without panic. He helped administer care, monitor Hope's condition, and even carried the baby to a nearby hospital when her fever worsened. Not once did he express frustration or demand acknowledgement. He simply acted, putting the baby's needs above his own pride. Lena watched him, a mixture of relief and cautious admiration stirring within her. This was not the man who had left her with $20. This was a man willing to sacrifice comfort, control, and ego for the well-being of their child. At the hospital, as Hope rested safely under observation, Lena finally spoke directly to Ethan. "You've changed," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But trust is not rebuilt in one night. You understand that?" Ethan nodded, exhaustion evident in his posture, but determination shining in his eyes. "I understand," he said, "and I am willing to spend whatever it takes to earn it. Every day, every moment. I won't stop, and I won't ask for forgiveness until you're ready." Lena studied him, her mind racing. Could she allow herself to hope again? Could she trust him with hope, with her heart? The answer was unclear, but she felt a subtle shift, a bridge forming, tentative but present. Over the next weeks, Ethan continued his quiet efforts. He attended every necessary appointment, helped without being asked, and demonstrated patience that bordered on extraordinary. Lena tested him subtly, presenting small challenges, observing his reactions, and noting his responses. Each time, he met the challenge with humility, restraint, and sincerity. Lena began to see him not as the man who had abandoned her, but as someone genuinely striving to become worthy of their family. It was a painful and cautious recognition, tempered by months of betrayal, but it was a step forward. Lena and Ethan had reached a pivotal point. Actions had replaced words, patience had tempered resentment, and the first sparks of trust had begun to form. The past had not been erased, but a path forward fragile, deliberate, and uncertain was now visible. The stage was set for the final arc: reconciliation, revelation, and the ultimate decision that would define the family's future. The morning was unusually quiet. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft gold light over the city that seemed almost too gentle for the storm brewing in Lena's mind. She held Hope close, cradling her daughter against her chest as if the small life depended entirely on her protection, which, at that moment, it did. Lena had spent weeks observing Ethan from a distance. She had seen the changes, the humility, the patience, the quiet acts of service, but this was no longer enough. Trust was not rebuilt through actions alone. It was rebuilt through shared experiences, through vulnerability, and through the courage to confront the past. Today, she would confront him. Ethan had arrived at the community clinic before sunrise, as usual. But he felt different that morning. There was a tension in the air that he could not ignore, a sense that the fragile bridge he had been building might finally be tested. Weeks of restraint, patience, and consistent action had led to this point. Every delivery, every act of care, every silent observation had been a step toward redemption. But now he knew words were inevitable. He paused outside Lena's apartment, noting the small movements of a mother and her child. Her child across the balcony. She was watching, waiting, and it was clear that today the fragile balance would tip. Lena stepped onto the street, hope in her arms, her gaze fixed firmly on Ethan. He was standing across the narrow lane, his posture cautious but steady. There was no arrogance in his eyes, no hint of entitlement, only sincerity, and a deep awareness of the pain he had caused. "Ethan," Lena began, her voice calm but firm, "we need to talk. Really talk." Ethan nodded. "I'm ready," he said softly. "Whenever you are." She studied him for a long moment. Memories of abandonment flashed vividly in her mind, the cold night she had spent alone, the fear, the hunger, the pain of realizing he had left her with nothing but $20. It was impossible to forget, impossible to forgive in a single conversation. Yet she felt an undeniable pull. "Do you understand what you did?" she asked, her voice rising slightly, tinged with the anger she had held in check for so long. Ethan met her gaze, unwavering. "I do," he said quietly. "Every day I've thought about it. Every day I've regretted it. And every day I've tried to learn what I should have done differently. I can't undo the past, but I am trying to be worthy in the present." Lena's eyes narrowed. "Trying is not enough. I've survived without you. I've protected Hope without you. And yet you act like a hero now for simply existing in her life." "I know," Ethan admitted. "And I don't expect you to forgive me today, or tomorrow, or even next week. I only ask for the chance to prove, over time, that I can be better, that I can be worthy of both of you. I am asking for patience, not absolution." Lena felt a flicker of emotion, anger, frustration, and something else buried beneath layers of hurt. She had seen him leave, dismiss her needs, and abandon her when she needed him most. Yet she had also seen weeks of consistent effort, humility, and restraint. Actions, she realized, did speak louder than words, but only if continued. "You understand the cost, don't you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "The cost of what you've done." Ethan nodded, eyes glistening. "Every moment of your suffering, every sleepless night, every fear you faced alone, I carry it with me. I will never underestimate again, and I will never take either of you for granted." There was a pause, heavy and charged. Hope stirred, cooing softly, and Lena instinctively drew her closer. She looked into Ethan's eyes and saw the man he had been, the man he was now, and the man he could become. "You have to understand," she said, voice firm, "this is not about money, apologies, or gestures. It's about trust. You have to earn it. Every day. No shortcuts. No excuses. If you fail, if you falter, if you try to control, then I will walk away. Permanently." Ethan swallowed hard. "I understand," he said. "I accept the challenge. Every day, I will work to earn your trust. Not because I want to, but because I must. For you, for Hope, and for myself." For the first time in weeks, Lena allowed herself to breathe. Not relief, caution, but the recognition that he was serious, that he understood the stakes, and that he had begun the long, painful journey toward redemption. Ethan stepped closer, but stopped well before the line she had drawn. He did not attempt to touch her or Hope. He simply stood there, a silent promise of patience, humility, and commitment. "You have to prove it," Lena whispered. "Not with words, not with money, not with gestures alone, but with every choice, every action, every day." Only then, she trailed off, leaving the thought unspoken. "I will," Ethan said. "Every day, no matter how long it takes. I swear it." The sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows on the street. Lena turned, holding Hope close, and began walking back toward the apartment. Ethan remained in place, watching, waiting, silently honoring the boundary she had set. It was a test for him to prove consistency, for her to measure sincerity. And though nothing was resolved, both understood that this conversation had changed everything. The bridge between them had begun to form, fragile but tangible. The past could not be undone, but the future, uncertain, delicate, and precious, was theirs to shape. For the first time, hope existed in more than a word. It was a living, breathing possibility. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain from the night before. Lena awoke to the soft cooing of Hope in her crib, stretching tiny arms and legs in the early sunlight. For months, this morning routine had been a symbol of survival, resilience, and the fragile independence she had built for herself and her daughter. Yet today felt different. There was a weight in the air, a sense that a chapter of her life, long fraught with uncertainty and pain, was approaching its turning point. She glanced at Hope, her heart swelling with love and fierce protectiveness. And then, almost instinctively, her gaze drifted to the window. Across the street, a familiar figure waited. Ethan. Weeks of observation, patience, and deliberate humility had brought them here. He stood quietly, hands folded, posture respectful, eyes filled with determination tempered by vulnerability. Gone was the arrogance of a man who believed wealth could solve everything. In its place was a quiet strength born of understanding the consequences of his past failures. Lena held Hope close, her heart conflicted. Anger, fear, and hurt still lingered, but a subtle recognition had begun to bloom. He had changed. Not overnight, not perfectly, but in ways that mattered most. He had proven his commitment consistently, silently, and without expectation. She stepped onto the street. Her steps were measured, cautious, yet deliberate. Ethan did not move to intercept her. He allowed her space, as he had for weeks, understanding that respect was as important as action. Ethan, Lena said softly, her voice calm but firm, "We are at a crossroads. Your actions over the past weeks, they've shown me something. But trust is fragile, and I need to see more. Every choice, every day, every moment counts." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand. And I will continue, without faltering, until you are ready. I don't expect absolution today or tomorrow. Only the chance to prove myself worthy of both of you." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The bustling city around them faded into insignificance. All that mattered was the fragile bridge being built carefully, deliberately between past mistakes and the hope for a shared future. Lena's heart wavered. She thought of the nights alone, the fear, the exhaustion. She thought of the way Hope's tiny fingers had curled instinctively around nothing, searching for stability, and realized that this changed. Man had begun to understand the true cost of his absence. "You've done better than I could have imagined," Lena admitted. "But this is only the beginning. Your journey isn't over, Ethan. And neither is mine. If you fail now, if you falter, if you revert to the man you were, I will walk away. Permanently." Ethan's eyes glistened. "I will not fail. I cannot. Not after everything. I will spend every moment proving that I am worthy of your trust and of Hope's love." Over the next few weeks, Lena allowed him cautious proximity. She observed his every action, how he cared for Hope, how he listened, how he acted without expectation or arrogance. Each gesture, each quiet demonstration of patience and love, built the foundation for what had long seemed impossible, trust reborn. Ethan never pressured her. He never demanded forgiveness. He worked quietly, consistently, humbly. He helped with errands, assisted in small but meaningful ways around the apartment, and showed genuine care for both mother and child. With each act, Lena's skepticism softened, replaced by cautious hope. One afternoon, Ethan helped fix a broken crib leg, his hands careful and deliberate. He carried Hope in his arms as he worked, softly singing a lullaby Lena had once sung herself. The melody was simple, tender, and unassuming, yet it carried a weight of sincerity she could not ignore. The turning point came unexpectedly. One evening, a minor accident occurred. Hope had rolled from a soft mattress onto the floor. Lena screamed instinctively, rushing to her daughter's side. Before she could even react further, Ethan was there, catching Hope gently, checking her over, and comforting both mother and child with calm precision. It was in that moment Lena realized that she no longer feared relying on him. Not entirely, not blindly, but enough to acknowledge that he had truly changed. She saw the father he was capable of becoming, and the partner he could strive to be. Tears filled her eyes as she held Hope close. "You've changed," she whispered. "Truly." Ethan nodded, his voice steady despite emotion. "I've learned the hard way. I will never leave you, never abandon you, never assume that money or power can replace love. I will spend every day proving it to you, and hope. Days turned into weeks. The tension, the caution, the tests all became part of a delicate rhythm. Trust was not instantaneous, but it grew steadily, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long storm. Lena observed, reflected, and allowed herself, cautiously, to believe in the possibility of reconciliation. One quiet evening, as Hope slept peacefully, Lena and Ethan sat together on the balcony. No words were necessary. They simply watched the city lights, the gentle hum of life around them, and the fragile yet undeniable bond forming between them. "I don't know what the future holds," Lena said softly, "but I do know this. Actions matter more than words, more than money, more than pride. You've learned that, and you've proven it." Ethan took her hand gently. "And I will continue to prove it every day for the rest of my life. I promise." Hope stirred, tiny arms reaching upward. Lena smiled, passing her daughter to Ethan. He held her carefully, tenderly, and whispered, "You are everything to me, Hope. Everything I lost, everything I failed to be. I am here now. Always." Lena watched, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and cautious love flooding her chest. The man who had abandoned them, who had left her with $20 and broken trust, was gone. In his place stood someone transformed, someone humbled, and someone willing to fight for the family he had once thought he could control without care. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time in years, Lena allowed herself to hope. The past had been painful, the journey arduous, but the bridge had been built. And now, together, they could step forward into a future defined not by wealth, not by mistakes, but by trust, love, and commitment. The city lights flickered softly as Ethan and Lena sat side by side, hope cradled between them. No grand declarations were necessary. The silence was enough a testament to survival, growth, and the enduring power of redemption. And in that quiet moment, the promise of tomorrow felt real, tangible, and unbreakable. Thank you for watching to the end. This really means a lot to us. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more story.